Good morning. Let me start with something that might genuinely surprise you. For a long time, the general advice given to older adults has leaned towards slowing down and accepting decline as simply inevitable. But a lot of the more recent longevity research pushes back hard against that idea. What if the things that keep people sharp, strong, and independent at 75, 80, even 85 aren't the things that came up at your last checkup, but a handful of daily habits that most people quietly let slip as they get older? I'm Dr. Aqib Arthur, and after many years working with patients in their 70s and 80s, I've noticed something the research increasingly backs up. The people who age the best, the ones still driving themselves to appointments, still gardening, still sharp in conversation, tend to share a specific, fairly small set of daily behaviors. Not expensive supplements, not complicated regimens, habits. There's a growing body of longevity research, including long-running cohort studies that track older adults for a decade or more, showing that people who consistently maintain several of these kinds of habits together are meaningfully less likely to experience the kind of rapid functional decline that pushes people into assisted living earlier than necessary. The habits tend to work better as a group than in isolation. That's an important point I'll come back to. Before we get into the list, I want to tell you now that the habit at number one is the one almost nobody talks about. It has little to do with diet or exercise in the traditional sense, and most routine checkups never bring it up. Stay with me to the end because it may be the one that changes how you think about the rest of this list. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Drop your age in the comments and tell me which of these habits you think you already have going. I read the comments on this channel, and this community matters to me. Let's count down from 6 to 1. Number 6, drinking water strategically, not just casually. Hydration after 75 doesn't work quite the way it did at 45. Kidney filtering efficiency declines with age. Thirst signals become noticeably blunted, meaning it's genuinely possible to be dehydrated without feeling thirsty. And even mild chronic underhydration reduces the blood's ability to deliver oxygen and nutrients efficiently to muscles and brain. Research on hydration in older adults links consistent, adequate fluid intake to better balance, fewer urinary tract infections, and better short-term cognitive performance. The brain is roughly 3/4 water, and even modest dehydration has a measurable effect on concentration and memory at any age, an effect that tends to be more pronounced in older adults whose compensatory systems are already working harder. The habit that seems to matter most isn't drinking water only when you remember, it's front-loading it. A glass of water first thing in the morning before coffee helps offset the fluid lost overnight through breathing. A small glass with each meal, plus one in the afternoon, keeps intake steady through the day rather than concentrated at the end of it. One useful detail: because older kidneys are somewhat less efficient at retaining sodium, a small amount of sodium, a pinch of sea salt, or an electrolyte tablet, particularly in the morning, can help the body actually hold on to and use the water you're drinking rather than passing it through unused. Number 5, resistance-based movement at least twice a week. I want to be clear about what this actually means because it's often misunderstood. This isn't about heavy gym lifting. It's any movement that asks your muscles to work against some kind of force, a resistance band, a light dumbbell, wall push-ups, even carrying groceries with intention. This matters more after 75 because of something called anabolic resistance. Aging muscle becomes less responsive to the normal signals that trigger muscle maintenance and repair, meaning it takes a somewhat stronger stimulus to get the same result a younger body gets more easily. Left unaddressed, this contributes to sarcopenia, the progressive age-related loss of muscle mass and strength, which is well documented as a major driver of falls, loss of independence, and reduced life expectancy in older adults. Research on resistance training in adults in their 70s and 80s has consistently shown meaningful gains in strength and balance within a matter of weeks, along with knock-on benefits for insulin sensitivity, energy, and inflammation. Resistance exercise appears to support healthier mitochondrial function, essentially improving how efficiently your cells produce energy. A practical target is 2 to 3 sessions a week, 20 to 30 minutes each, focused on the large muscle groups, legs, hips, and back. Resistance bands work particularly well for older adults because they build strength progressively without hard impact on the joints. It also helps to have a source of protein, roughly 25 to 30 grams, within the half hour or so after a session, since the window in which aging muscle most efficiently uses that protein for repair is somewhat narrower than it is earlier in life. Number 4, a consistent, purposeful sleep schedule. Before I go further, if this video is useful to you, take a second to subscribe. This channel exists to bring you science-backed information that a typical short appointment often doesn't have time for. Now, back to sleep, because there's more to this than simply going to bed early. As people move into their 70s and beyond, the body's internal clock, the circadian rhythm, tends to weaken and shift. Melatonin production declines, and time spent in deep, physically restorative slow-wave sleep, the phase associated with tissue repair and immune function, drops significantly compared to earlier decades. This isn't just about daytime tiredness. Research increasingly links poor, fragmented sleep in older adults to worse markers of brain health over time, which is part of why sleep quality, not just quantity, gets so much attention in aging research now. What seems to help most isn't sleeping more so much as sleeping consistently, going to bed and waking within roughly the same window every day, including weekends, keeping the bedroom cool, since temperature regulation during sleep becomes less efficient with age, and stepping away from screens for the last hour before bed, since mental stimulation late in the evening tends to delay the onset of sleep. A short period of slow, deliberate breathing before bed, even 5 to 10 minutes, can help shift the body out of a stress response and into the kind of calm state that makes falling into deep sleep easier. Number 3, eating protein in a deliberate, distributed pattern. This is where I see one of the more harmful pieces of nutritional folklore still in circulation, the idea that people need less protein as they age. It's essentially the opposite of true. Because of the anabolic resistance I mentioned earlier, older adults generally need more protein per pound of body weight than a younger adult to maintain the same amount of muscle, not less. Yet appetite naturally declines with age, and many older adults end up eating well under what they actually need, often leaning more heavily on easy carbohydrates instead. Research on protein intake in older populations has linked adequate, well-distributed protein intake to better preserved muscle mass, fewer fall-related injuries, and a stronger immune response to common infections. Think of protein as the raw material your body uses to rebuild tissue overnight. Without enough of it consistently, that nightly repair process runs at a deficit that adds up over months and years. A practical approach is aiming for roughly 25 to 35 grams of protein at each of 3 main meals. About 4 to 5 ounces of chicken, fish, eggs, Greek yogurt, or legumes. Spreading protein across the day rather than loading it into one meal matters because aging muscle can only make efficient use of a limited amount of protein at any single sitting. The rest tends to be used for energy rather than repair. Pairing protein-rich meals with a source of vitamin C, citrus, bell pepper, a splash of lemon juice, is also worth doing since vitamin C supports collagen production, which works alongside protein to maintain connective tissue and joint health, not just muscle. Number 2, daily intentional social engagement. I mentioned earlier that one of the last 2 items would surprise people, and this is usually the one. It sounds more like emotional advice than medical advice, but the research behind it is some of the most consistent in the field of aging. Large population studies have repeatedly found that chronic social isolation carries a mortality risk comparable to some of the more established risk factors we normally associate with physical health. In older adults specifically, loneliness has been linked to faster cognitive decline, elevated risk of dementia, and higher levels of inflammatory markers that are themselves tied to cardiovascular and immune strain. The mechanism makes sense biologically. Genuine social interaction, actively listening, responding, laughing, disagreeing, tends to activate the same neural circuitry involved in memory and decision making. Passive social contact, like sitting in the same room as the television on, doesn't seem to provide the same benefit. The interaction has to be genuinely engaged. And because neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, naturally declines with age, neural pathways that go unused for extended periods become harder to restore later. The practical target is at least one genuinely engaged social interaction a day, an in-person visit, a properly engaged phone call, a regular group, a walking partner, a standing lunch with a neighbor. Where possible, combining social time with light physical activity, a walk with a friend, a gentle group exercise class, gardening together, appears to have a compounding benefit for brain health beyond either activity alone. And now, number one, the habit I mentioned at the start, and one that a relatively small share of older adults maintain consistently, even though researchers studying cognitive aging increasingly describe it as one of the most underused, low-cost interventions available. Number one, daily, purposeful cognitive challenge. Not crossword puzzles, not passive reading. Those have some value, but I mean something more demanding. Genuinely learning something new, a language, an instrument, a new skill that requires real, sustained effort and some amount of productive struggle. Here's why this ranks first. As the brain ages, it becomes more efficient at relying on familiar, well-worn neural pathways and more reluctant to build new ones. A natural energy-conserving tendency, not a flaw. The problem is that this same tendency is part of what depletes what researchers call cognitive reserve, the brain's buffer against age-related change, its capacity to keep functioning well even as some structural decline occurs. Longitudinal studies following older adults for years at a time have found that those who regularly engage in novel, cognitively demanding activity tend to show slower, measurable brain changes and better preserved memory and processing speed than those who don't. And some research links sustained engagement in intellectually demanding activity to a meaningfully lower risk of dementia over time. The underlying mechanism is neuroplasticity. While it does decline with age, it doesn't disappear, and the brain retains a real capacity for meaningful change well into advanced age, provided it's given a strong enough reason to change. Learning a new language, for instance, engages several brain regions simultaneously and has been associated in research with delayed cognitive decline. Learning a musical instrument combines fine motor control, auditory processing, and memory in a way few other activities do. Even learning to cook an unfamiliar cuisine, with its reading, sequencing, and sensory demands, counts as meaningful cognitive challenge. A practical approach is picking one genuinely new skill every few months and spending 20 to 30 minutes a day actively working at it, actively being the key word. Watching someone else play an instrument isn't the same as sitting down and struggling through it yourself. That struggle is where the benefit actually comes from. It's the cognitive equivalent of resistance training, and the resistance is the point. It's also worth noting that omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, found in fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines, are a major structural component of brain cell membranes. And some research suggests that people with better omega-3 status get more cognitive benefit out of this kind of mental training. In other words, the nutrition and the cognitive challenge appear to work better together than either alone. I'd encourage you to look into the research behind any of this yourself and to bring it up with your own doctor as part of an informed conversation about what's right for your specific situation. Let me close with something I mean sincerely. Having sat across from a great many patients in their 70s and 80s, I've come to believe this stage of life gets treated far too often as a countdown when the research increasingly suggests it should be treated as a continuation. The body and mind at 75, 80, 85 retain a real, if sometimes underestimated, capacity for resilience, not in spite of age, but very much in dialogue with it. The 6 habits we've gone through today, strategic hydration, resistance movement, consistent sleep, deliberate protein intake, Daily social connection and purposeful cognitive challenge aren't about turning back the clock. They're about making the fullest possible use of the time still on it. Carrying your own groceries, remembering names without effort, driving yourself to your own appointments, laughing at dinner with someone who matters to you. That's what independence actually looks like, and I've seen it more than once in patients who'd been told there wasn't much left to work with. It's genuinely never too late to start. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd be glad to have you along. Every week, this channel puts together grounded, research-informed health information for people who want to stay strong and independent on their own terms. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave your age in the comments and tell me which of these 6 habits you already feel solid on and which one you want to build next. I read every one. Take good care of yourself. You're worth the effort.